1017 The Zoo, KKZU. Roper here with you guys on the Morning Zoo. I have the distinct privilege and honor of being joined by E.L. Easy Lover Fowler. He is a World War II vet. Mr. Fowler, good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm kind of curious now. You chewed a lot of hard dirt about 70 years ago, and I'm curious. First, before we get into that stuff, I'd like to know where you're from.
We were born and raised on the state line on the 100th Meridian, northwest of Sweetwater, Oklahoma, a little community of Meridian, and is named after the 100th Meridian. And I was born in the year that George Bush was born, and Doris Day and Jimmy Carter, and born to a cotton farmer there. And we've seen a lot of change in our life, from the horse and buggy or the team of horses to the rocket on the moon. And went to a small school called Meridian, and we had 6 boys that graduated at that school, and all 5 of them went into the service during World War II.
Wow. Wow. Now, let me ask you this. What before you went into service, what did you do?
Well,
were you just fresh out of high school when you went in?
I was 18 years old, so I had stayed on the farm, milked cows, and picked cotton, and most of the time did the farm chores. And but when the war broke out, I was a junior in high school.
Okay, you weren't old enough to get in.
No, but it was a funny situation. The day that we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, we were boys at Sweetwater, just a gang of boys on Sunday afternoon, and we saw this friend of ours that we knew. He had a uniform on, and that's the first soldier that we had ever seen. And he had an old Model A car, and of course they didn't come with radios in them, but he had a radio put in there.
Yeah. And
we were listening to that, and they told us that Pearl Harbor had been bombed.
How did that make you feel?
Well, the next day at school, we all decided that we wanted to go join and whip some Japs.
I'll bet you did.
So we were all ready to go quit school and go into the induction center. And the superintendent called us in, and he said, "Boys," he said, "they've got plenty of men to fight right now, and they don't have room to train you. So go ahead and finish school, and you'll be able to go later." So that was very true. As we finished high school, well, 3 months later, we were inducted into the Army.
My granddad, he reflected to me before he passed away that the mindset of the country was just like how you reflected, which is everybody was ready to throw their boots on and go kick some asses.
The country was united. Everyone was war-minded, and we had the victory gardens. The city people in the city built gardens, and of course tire rationing was on. No more new cars built. All the automobile manufacturers went into building planes and tanks and jeeps, and most of the sugar was rationed. Well, almost everything was rationed that we eat. And, of course, living on a farm, we grew a lot of our own vegetables and beef and such as that.
But, even though all of these commodities and goods were rationed, seems to me like everybody in concert was willing to work as hard as they possibly could here to support the efforts overseas, both in the South Pacific and over in Europe. Am I correct?
Very true. And for an example, my wife, to whom I've been married to 70 years, we were high school sweethearts, and she was a year ahead of me in school. And so as soon as she graduated, she went to California at Santa Monica and roomed with my 2 cousins out there, and they built airplanes. She was Rosie the Riveter.
She sure was.
And of course, I was lovesick, and as soon as I graduated from high school, well, I went to California.
Yeah.
And I went down to the county seat there in Los Angeles, and we wanted a marriage license. They said, "You got a birth certificate?" I said, "No, I don't have it with me." And said, "You got to be 21. Of course, I was 18. So, needless to say, we got on the bus and went to Yuma, Arizona, and we were married there. So we was married 3 months before I went overseas. And on our anniversary, first anniversary date, I was on the high seas headed toward Omaha Beach.
Oh, wow. All right, so you went down to Arizona, who I guess the state law was different than you could marry when you were 18.
Yes, the whole bus load was couples going to get married, and we got off the bus, and they said, "Are you the couple from Los Angeles that came to get married?" And I thought I was a silly kid, and I wondered how in the world they knew.
Yeah.
They said, "Get in my car, and we'll take you to the wedding chapel."
Wow. This is amazing speaking to you. All right, so what branch of service did you go in?
I was in the 29th Division, which was made up of Maryland, Virginia National Guard. It was the first National Guard created in the United States during the Civil War.
And was that then Army, I guess?
Yes, as infantry.
All right, so you go and get married. And you're married how long before you ship off to boot camp?
Well, a year to boot camp. No, probably 3 months. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So then you're in boot camp for a couple of months at least.
Yes.
And then you get out for how long to be able to see your wife before you get shipped overseas?
Probably 10 days maybe. Mm-hmm.
What a honeymoon.
And we got on the bus at Sayre, Oklahoma, rode it to El Reno, waited for the Rock Island Railroad to come through, taking us to Kansas City and on to Chicago and New York. And I've got to tell you, that Sunday morning was a lonesome morning.
I'll bet it was. When you jumped on your bus and you headed toward the Northeast, now where did your wife go? Did she stay in California and continue to work in a factory, build airplanes?
She went to Tinker Field and went to work at Douglas Aircraft there, building airplanes with another cousin of ours. Mm-hmm. And she stayed there till I was liberated by the Russians.
Wow. Your first active duty assignment, can you tell me what that was? When you shipped overseas, where did you go?
We deported at Liverpool, England, mm-hmm. And we got on the ship there in Boston, and we sailed the sea alone. We didn't have escorts, and the submarines were real prevalent at that time.
Yes, they were.
And we zigged every 30 seconds to avoid
torpedo.
Yes. And we sailed around Iceland and back down into Liverpool and deported and went to southeast England and got our ammunition and all of our supplies to go to Normandy.
Let's see. Pearl Harbor was bombed. You were still in high school. You had boot camp. Was it about 1943 when you went in?
That's correct.
Okay. And so you sailed across the North Atlantic right in the height of, what did they call those? It was the U-boats. They called them something.
U-boats, yes.
Yeah, they called them the U-boats. And just the mere fact that you guys got over there unescorted, unscathed, that's a miracle in itself. So you trained over there in Liverpool, and you were under the command of Dwight Eisenhower, probably.
Yes.
Okay. What happened then?
Of course, we got our supplies, and we got on the train and went to Southampton, and there we got on all the boats were loading there to go into Normandy. And, of course, the seas were pretty rough, and Eisenhower, he debated about going time after time, and he made a very big decision. The decision was all on his shoulder to go. But the storms had hit Normandy at that time, and the seas were really rough, and it was pretty hectic, and they hadn't planned on the weather there.
Mm-hmm. I understand that the weather guys were probably the fellows that were under the most pressure during those few weeks.
Yes.
So you've jumped in the boat. Now, you said that you were infantry.
Yes.
Oh, boy. So you're pretty much the guys that are taking the brunt of the focus. You guys are the ones that are in the little boats that open in the front. What do you call those craft? The landing craft.
Kelly boat. Like made in New Orleans. I can't think of it right now. But we crawled down the ladder, rope ladders on the side of the boat, and got into them. We was out to
Was that an LST?
LSDs. That's right.
An LSD, yeah. My grandfather was on one.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, my grandfather's brother He died at Omaha Beach. As a matter of fact, getting off of one of those craft, the whole group of guys that was in his boat, they're all gone. They never even made it out of the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left it there.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to this. It's just amazing to me that I'm speaking to you right now. There's so many guys died. I wonder, whenever you're on the water and you're headed over there, give me your mindset.
Well, you prayed a lot. And, of course, the anxiety was high. And you thought you'd probably never be coming back. And those thoughts went through your mind, and everyone was pretty quiet and serene and having all this load on their mind. But in crawling off that ship, we had about 70 pounds of packs. We had all of our food supplies and ammunition, and the water, they let us off the LSDs a little far out, and the water was up to almost our neck, and all the heavy load of the 70-pound pack and trying to tread the water and keep our gun dry was a pretty big chore. And then someone shooting at you, too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty stressful. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine. Now, did you get seasick on the way over there?
Yes.
Oh, boy.
The water came up over the deck. As we were going to England, we were all sick, and I went to the mess hall to eat, and, of course, a lot of them regurgitated right in their trays, and they couldn't stand the smell of the food. So I got me a box of candy and went to my hammock and lay in that most of the time going overseas.
Yeah, probably wise choice. Keep your stomach on empty.
I didn't remember getting sick going into Normandy, no.
Did the thought about your wife ever cross your mind while you're on your way over there?
Yes, most every day. Mm-hmm. Oh, 7/24 probably.
I'll bet. How many letters do you think you wrote while you were there?
My letters never did reach home. And my wife wrote letters every night, and all of her letters were returned and tied in a bundle. And I never did get her letters.
Oh, man. I'll bet that was just absolute torture.
But after we were in prison camp, they were censored, and they let us send a card once in a while, and the Red Cross, through the Red Cross, but a lot of those never did reach home either.
Let's back up for just a second. Once you made landfall there at Omaha Beach, what happened?
Well, the town that we were to take it in 15 days, was St. Lo. It was a nerve center of Normandy, trade center, and about 5 roads led into St. Lo. Well, St. Lo was taken about 6 weeks after we landed, so it wasn't as easy as they had planned. But we got into the hedgerows, and the hedgerows were very hard to navigate. Each one was an obstacle, and the tanks couldn't move because of the growth on those hedgerows. And every little field, the Germans were behind. They were set up waiting. So they had the advantage on the hedgerows. And evidently the hedgerows were not planned for during the planning of the battle.
Yeah.
So it was just take one hedgerow at a time, and of course the casualty count was very, very high.
Horrific.
Yeah.
Horrific. How many guys were in your squad?
Well, 15, and I imagine 3/4 of our company was either killed or wounded.
How long were you in battle before you were captured?
I was captured July the 31st on my wife's birthday, and 1943. We had just taken, my battalion was the first to take and hold St. Lo, and our colonel was killed there on the streets of St. Lo. And after that, we were attached to Patton's Third Army as we went south of St. Lo to the little community of Percy, France. And we were supporting 5 tanks, and Patton was determined to beat General Montgomery, the English general, to Paris in order to get the glory. So Patton got us too far out ahead of the front lines, and Panzer Tank Division of Germans cut us off, and we were down to 50 men, and our captain said we're going to have to surrender. So they've got us surrounded, and they were pointing their 88s on the tanks at us as we was laying in our foxholes, and he evidently had a white flag, and he waved the white flag, and that they took us as prisoners at that time. But there were only 70 left, or 50, excuse me, about 50 left.
Of how many?
And the rest of them were killed and wounded.
Of how many beginning there?
Well, I don't know. We were so scattered at that time. I don't know whether we even had a company then or not.
This is unbelievable. Okay. You said that you guys were in foxholes and you were pinned in there. Once you found out that you guys had been surrendered and you were going to be taken prisoner, can you give me any details as to what happened once you started to crawl out of your foxholes? What happened? How did that transpire?
Well, the Germans waved at us to come over there, and they brought us to an old barn, and I had hand grenades hanging all over me, and they weren't interested in the hand grenades because they knew they had us anyway, and we couldn't have escaped or done any damage. Mm-hmm. And they were after our fountain pens, our rings, our money, and silver, wristwatches, any loot they could find.
Wow.
For about 30 minutes they were searching us, and of course they took our guns, and then they loaded us in boxcars. There weren't room enough for only, I forget what they called it. They've put horses in those cars, and there's room for about 12 horses, I believe. Maybe wrong there, but anyway, there wasn't enough room for us to all we just had to sit there. There wasn't room enough to lay down or anything. And we traveled across France there in the hottest part of the summer.
Yeah.
And
let me stop you for 1 second. When they captured you guys and they started inventorying your personal effects, did they steal your wedding ring?
No, they didn't get it.
Huh.
And I had a picture of my wife in my pocket here, and they wanted to know if that was my girlfriend or wife. But
did any of those guys speak English to you?
Oh yeah,
they did. Okay.
The Germans spoke good English.
Huh.
They taught it in school.
Very good.
Yeah.
Jesus, I have to confess to you, this is very emotional for me. I feel very honored to be speaking to you right now.
Thank you.
Okay, so they've got you corralled up like animals in these boxcars, if you will. Where did they take you?
Well, our plane strafed us boxcars the first night out. They had POW written on top of the boxcars, but evidently the Germans were putting their troops in between the boxcars and moving their troops, and they was using that as a shield.
Yeah.
And the first night out, our planes, fighter planes, strafed the engine, and also the first car behind the engine, and killed 16 of the men. And then that same night, there were several escaped out of the boxcars. So in order to give us a lesson, they let us in the boxcars for 5 days, and we had food, but we didn't have any water. And we traveled 5 days without any water. And one of the windows in the boxcar had a little slit in it, and it rained a couple of times, and we put a cardboard in the window where the water could come in there, and we caught enough water to drink and wet our mouths a little bit.
Wow.
During the rain, but we had food, and of course, you wanting water and dry, you don't want to eat food. You're thirsty.
Yeah, it's not food that keeps you alive for a month. It's the water. You need the water. You can go without that food, but good Lord. So where did they take you?
They took us to a chateau in France there for a few days, and then eventually we rode in the boxcars again to East Germany. We went to Freiburg, Germany, and Chemnitz and Dresden and East Germany. And I don't know whether you know or not, but there were more people killed in Dresden than there were an atomic bomb in Japan. We firebombed. Our English and the Americans firebombed Dresden for 3 days and nights. And
that was the blanket bombing campaign.
It just burned the city. And people were in air raid shelters. They suffocated,
from all the smoke inhalation.
But anyway, we were near those places, but we were not in a stalag. We were in a work camp. We dug ditches and water lines, shoveled snow off the railroads in the wintertime, and we dug air raid shelters. So that was, and we lived on 700 calories a day. They marched us every morning in the dark to work, and we came home at night, marched in the dark to back to our where we stayed.
How long were you imprisoned?
Till the end of the war. I was liberated late in May by the Russians, and they had kept moving us away from the American lines toward the Russian lines, and
why did they do that? It seems to me that the Germans were more scared of the Russians by that time than they were the Americans. So why would they move you more toward the eastern side?
Well, very true. They dreaded the Russians. They knew what was in store for them. They were paying back, and I don't know unless I didn't understand the strategy, but we were on a march all during that time that the Americans were getting close to where we were, and we stayed in old barns at night and just slept out in the open.
Now, how many of you were they moving around? It seems like that would be
60 of us.
Okay.
In this one, we stayed in an old hotel. Frau Bain was her name. She ran the hotel, and she let us have hot water to make ersatz out of. It was similar to coffee because it was black, but we'd go down and get hot water 3 at a time, and the guard would go with us. Mm-hmm. And she'd, when we first went there, she thought we were gangsters. They had propaganda and told all the Germans how the Americans were, and she was scared of us. But eventually she got to loving us, and she'd let us have that hot water. And she'd whisper the war news to us, and we knew what was coming, and Americans are getting a little closer.
I'd have to say that represents the fact that there was rationality even amongst the German people, that what's going on was not a healthy thing.
It was whispered. It wasn't outward.
Yeah, I mean there were the hierarchy in the German command that made their attempts to knock off Hitler and everything. So that also represented that even within the ranks, they thought that what the Nazi regime was doing was completely irrational.
Well, it's just like we're seeing a lot today in our government. And the government takes over. And the people, they do it gradual, and the people are hoodwinked, and then they get to where they're afraid to do anything.
That's exactly what happened with Germany.
Yes.
They made a series of political changes within the nation. Mm-hmm. One thing led to another, and then all of a sudden you have this really pretty eerie regime.
Well, it's like the story they said that they came for the union workers, and then they came for the Jews, and then they came for me, and then there wasn't anybody left to help me. And when the time rolled around, but
tell me about the day that you were liberated. And tell me about the days leading up to being liberated.
They had eventually moved us down into Czechoslovakia in the mountains there, and the SS troopers were still holding out in the mountains. So the war was officially over May the 8th, but they were still fighting there, and the SS troopers were entrenched in the hills and mountains there. And we were the guards, and we had a wagon with a team of horses, and we were moving our belongings, you might say, and loot. We had looted by that time, and our airplane strafed some of our own POWs that day and killed them. They were with the German guards, and they didn't know the difference. And,
sure.
But there were three of us that we stayed together, and as soon as they strafed us, we hit the ditches there, and the ditches were full of water. And then the guards began to pull our uniforms off and threw the guns in the lake and started wearing civilian clothes, and so that they wouldn't be recognized by the Americans. And then we went on into the city of Chemnitz, and we got in 6 of us men by that time, and we got in our Nazis' apartment there. It's about 6 stories high. We stayed there, and the Russians kept saying that they were going to get us back out to the American lines, but we kept waiting and waiting, and they never did. And the Russians were very ruthless, and when they took this town, we saw them down in the streets. They had raped some woman about 6 times there in the street that night, and they were drunken, and they walked through there looking for her, and they came on up to our apartment, and they kicked the door in, and we were sitting on the couch there, and they had their guns ready to spray us, and we jumped up and started calling out that we were Americans and Americanas, and boy, they got happy then, and they wanted us to have a toast and all that,
Ready to share the vodka, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, they gave me a vodka, and I was kind of tipped it, and he said, no, and he mixed it with water about halfway, and it floated around kind of like kerosene. And,
oh, boy.
And when he had his back turned, I went in the sink and poured it down the sink.
And then you said, thank you.
Then he poured me another one. But they were ruthless.
Yeah.
They were looting, and they was paying Germany back.
They were indeed. I believe that that was recompense for what they felt like they had lost to the Germans at Stalingrad.
Yes.
What happened then? How did you get back to the American lines?
Well, the 6 of us, we would go out of an evening and look for food there in that city, maybe potatoes or something. Mm-hmm. And eventually we started. They said, the Russians said, "Now we got a bus that'll take you to the American lines." Well, we got about a mile out of the city, and some Russians stopped us and made us get off. And he said, "We need this bus worse than you do." So we started walking toward Czechoslovakia there, and we walked until we found an old Volkswagen sitting there, and the battery was dead on it. And of course, all the cars were in the road, bombed and strafed.
Yeah.
So we found a battery and put on this old Volkswagen, and the 6 of us crawled in that Volkswagen and started toward Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Well, we started up the hills, and that old clutch got hot in the Volkswagen and started slipping, and we couldn't make it up the hill, so we had to start walking.
Oh, boy.
And we walked into this city, and we spent the night in another old bus there. And the next morning, we looked out the window, and there sat that Volkswagen. I guess the clutch had cooled off, and someone had driven it in.
I guess that was a pretty nice little laugh for you guys there that morning. I'm curious now. Backing up just a minute. So you're back at this Nazi apartment. Okay. How long are you guys left alone? Because I know that there was a point where the Germans said, hell with this, we're out of here. Let's get out of here before we get pinched. And so they left, and then they just kind of left you guys there.
We was probably on our own for about, 10 days maybe.
10 days. Mm-hmm. Now, was the woman who running the apartment there, she stayed there, though, right? Or
no, she ran through the bottom of the apartment and went out the back way.
So she was gone too. So there was no one there besides you guys, and then the Russians showed up.
Well, it could have been in the, I don't know, in the apartments below. There could have been.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, but you guys were basically free to your own devices for about 10 days.
Yeah.
Okay, so you finally got out of there, and you made it there to, where was the city in Czechoslovakia?
Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, and then eventually they took it to Prague, and I flew back to Camp Lucky Strike and put in the hospital there in a plane possibly that my wife had built, a C-47.
Wow, God love her. From the time you last saw your wife here stateside, went over there, did what you did, lived through what you lived through, got back to the States, how long was it between times you saw your wife?
From the time I left till I saw her again?
Yeah.
It was May of 40, about the last day of May in 45. And,
almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't get to see her then. She was in the hospital when I got home.
Oh, yeah?
They brought us back to Boston, the city that we shipped out of. And when we left Boston, we had a big band playing, and the Red Cross was there to greet us. And when we came back, there wasn't anyone there. And they put us in old train cars that didn't have any air conditioning in it, and it was an old coal car. It was hot, and they had the windows fixed where you couldn't open them, and finally we got the windows open, and all that smoke from the train come in the train. And when we got back to Camp Goover, well, we were almost, our skins were black with coal dust.
And you know what? You were so happy to be there, you didn't give a damn, did you?
Didn't care. And, a real strange thing happened. We was coming through Arkansas, and this kid on there was from Arkansas, and he was standing in the doorway of the train as we passed through. I forget which town it was, and lo and behold, there sat his mother and daddy at the stoplight waiting for the train to pass, and I thought he was going to jump off.
Wow.
But he didn't.
You lived an amazing couple of years over there, and I'm sure you've heard it time and time and again, but I'm going to tell you, I guarantee you have no idea how lucky you are to have survived that. That is an amazing life that you've lived. And I want to know, after you got out of the service, I'm presuming that you discharged thereafter?
Yes, we went to rehab. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was in Fort Lewis, Washington, where I was discharged.
Really quickly, I'm curious about this. Did you have to see any kind of doctors as far as therapy, any kind of counseling after you got back stateside? They didn't do that?
No, they sent us to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we just went down there and relaxed. Mm-hmm.
Just invited you to take a couple of baths per day, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Just enjoy it.
Yes.
God bless you, guy. Well, okay. You discharged in 45. I'm imagining that the entirety of your experience had to shape the man that you became. Is there any one aspect of that, or is it the entirety of it all, that kind of helped shape who you became? And did that affect just your public life, for instance, when you worked around others, or did it affect your marriage also? How did that affect you? What did all of that experience, how did all of that experience affect you, both personally and in your public life?
Well, of course, we were very dependent upon the Lord, and I always thought if I got to come back, I'd surrender my life to the Lord and live for Him. And it was an experience that I knew if the Lord hadn't been watching over me, I wouldn't have come back. And it was, I never could figure out why so many died, then I stayed alive. And I was very appreciative of it. And so I've tried to live a good life and be a good citizen. And I think you look back and you probably forget a lot of the bad things, and remember the funny things. And, of course, raising a family, that takes your mind off of a lot of things. And seeing your family grow up and be good citizens. So it's just a lot of that fades away. I don't know how to express it or tell you what you'd like to know for sure.
Well, no, you're telling me exactly what I'm interested in hearing is how it affected you.
But I've had flashbacks. I don't deny that, and it's always prevalent. You don't entirely get over it, but
no.
By the grace of God, you do.
My granddad, he used to reflect on this one situation that he had, wherein his commanding officer had told their whole encampment, the Japanese more than likely are going to sneak into the camp. They don't want to kill you. They don't want to get in a firefight. They want your food. And so your orders are to pretend like you're asleep and let them steal your food. And that's what happened to him. And so he remembered distinctly one night having a Jap in the tent going through his food. They took the food. That had to be one of the scariest things ever. These people are out there. They want to cut your head off. Yeah. They want to do you in. And so, of course, how he reconciled the amount of stress that you guys had to deal with was to reflect back on it as something funny. You have to admit, it kind of is. You can kind of laugh at that a little bit.
I'm sure the Japs were more ruthless than the Germans were.
I wouldn't say that one was any worse than the other. All I can tell you is that what you guys had to deal with, you in particular, my friend, that's an amazingly scary thing.
A lot of the POWs were frightened that they were doing a lot of experiments, medical experiments.
Yes.
And we didn't know when we might be called to do that, And we'd go into a gas chamber, and maybe we thought that'd be the last, and they'd let us use a shower in there.
Oh, boy.
They didn't turn the gas on, but, you never know if they're going to do that or not.
So you have been inside one of those gas chambers?
Yes. I think if a person had a citizen out that's never been in a war, they don't know the extremes of it, and it's something that you can't explain, and it's something that you just endure, and your own energy there that comes from above or something. It's energy you don't really have.
I don't suppose you really have a choice.
No.
When you're there, you're just there.
Yeah.
And so you just breathe. I suspect that, just like my granddad, though, he talked about several situations that really gave him a chuckle. You said that you had a funny story.
Well, when I was stationed at Seattle there on Puget Sound, after the experiences overseas, we were waiting to get discharged, and one morning at headquarters, the general drove up in his Jeep, and I decided I'd take our Jeep and go up to the bowling alley. So I jumped in the Jeep, went up to the bowling alley, and gone about 30 minutes, and I drove back, and there stood the general on the boardwalk, and he said, "Soldier, what's the number of your Jeep?" I looked at the number on my Jeep, and lo and behold, it was his Jeep.
Oops.
That I had taken to the bowling alley.
He stole the general's Jeep.
I just knew that he was really going to chew me out, but he didn't hardly say a word. Evidently, he hadn't been waiting long for his Jeep.
Did you say, well, I bowled the highest score ever, if that matters to you, sir?
You can look back at a lot of things, but that was one of the outstanding things, I think.
there have been several times here over the past 50 minutes I've been talking to you that I've gotten pretty emotional. Most of the men in my family were all in the military. I'm actually, to my knowledge, the first in my generation, going all the way back to my great-grandparents, that didn't go into the military. My dad was staunchly opposed to me going in the military. My grandfather, Ray Aranda, he was my hero, and more than just because, it's your granddad and you do that, just perhaps the way you saw your grandfolks. But the more that the older that I got and the more interested I was in his life, the more that I became interested in the era in which he lived. And I think, E.L., that period in American history, as it was stressful and difficult and sometimes dark, I quantify it as one of the proudest times in America, that the mindset of you guys was a mindset of caring about the guy right there next to you. I don't think it's the same now. I'm not sure, but it just seems different to me. I look at you men, and it makes me think, I wish we collectively were more like you guys. And I can't thank you enough.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't look at myself as a hero. I've got a story written, what I think is a hero. There's a bond between military people that it's kind of like a brotherly love, only it's different. Mm-hmm. And there's you've been to the same place, and done the same thing, and you know how the other person feels, and there's a difference there in being bonded together, I think, among military people. It's not that we're any better, but it's just that there's a bond there that'll always be there.
I've had a number of friends who were Marines. A very dear friend of mine, when I was in Del City, me and this kid, Robert Hudson, we were to get up this one morning, go to the Marine recruiters. We were going to jump in the Corps together. Well, for some reason, I had a change of heart. I started to think second about some other options. Well, he went ahead. Well, he ended up in Somalia in 1993. That there was this incident over there. I don't know if you're aware of it or not. And I lived with him whenever he got back. And he had this friend named Gonzo. I had never met the guy before he went into service, but he befriended this guy while he was in. And their friendship was different than the friendship between me and Robert would ever be. And I think that that's kind of like what you're talking about. He quantified this fellow as a brother in that regard.
My experience in the battle, seeing my buddy wounded the first 15 minutes in battle was hard to take. And he was from Alva, Oklahoma, and he got to come home during the war. And my parents went up to visit with him, see if they knew anything about me. Of course, they didn't. But I went back over there, my brother and I, and a doctor from Fort Worth in 1979, and to see the places where I'd been. And I'd like to read this to you.
Please do.
As I went back to Normandy Beach, I stood there motionlessly, gazing with disbelief at all the silence of the white crosses, thousands of them, row after row. I cried unashamedly. First Lieutenant, Lieutenant Colonel, Sergeant, Private, PFC, and on, these soldiers who lay buried here, sons, fathers, brothers, left loved ones behind to fight for a cause of our freedom and our way of life. The sun was shining respectfully, and it was quiet, oh, so very quiet. Then the sound of war returned to my head. The terrifying screams of the bombs raining down, thunderously exploding, dust, debris, and pieces of body everywhere, and cries of anguish all around me. War is hell. I've come back to Europe to see once more where I had fought as a young man in World War II. Now I'm an old grandfather, and I know my remaining years are few, but I'm determined to have a last look before joining my comrades before me.
Wow. I couldn't be more thankful to be sitting here with you right now. And I think that part of the reason why you're still here with us is to honor your mates by telling your story. You honor them. You represent them in the highest regard. Thank you so much for what you've done for us. And thank you for telling your story.
Well, thank you. I feel it's a privilege because this will never be told by a lot of people, and people need to know what transpired and to know that war is never good for either side. It's something that we never want to have. And of course, I had a grandson that went back to the Gulf War. He's in the Marines, and it was hard to see him leave, but he came, thank the Lord, he came back in one piece. So that's what we're here for. And I would like to see our nation reunited together like it was in World War II, and get back like it was then, fight for one cause, and I think our country would be a lot better off.